Hello there guys, Blair Harrison aka Harrison Productions here. I hope you all are keeping well and thought I'd try an experiment and I've seen a new documentary on a particular band that I wouldn't say I'm a fan, well I guess I sort of am a fan, but you know I've been interested by. And in case you don't know what that is of course the recent documentary on America's favourite Californian surfing band, the Beach Boys, with the new documentary from Disney Plus called The Beach Boys. Very original title, I know. Which was directed by Frank Marshall and Tom Zimney. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Apologies for that. And it was released on the 25th of May, 2024. Clearly, this is I'm looking at my watch, the 10th of June. And I thought I'd give it a few months, few weeks to, let it settle in. And obviously you have seen a lot of reviews of this documentary by proper fans who have better knowledge than I have. And I don't know why, it was on my mind. I thought, should I not? Because clearly everyone else. But I thought, no, you know what? I thought I'd give it something different because, I'm a 26-year-old music lover. I've been fascinated by the Beach Boys when I first saw a video about them and I got into Pet Sounds and California Girls, the song. I mean, how can you not with that iconic bass line? And I thought I'd give my views on it because, this documentary was aimed for a much younger audience. Of course, I'm 26, but, I thought I'd give you my thoughts. And, it exists. So in case you don't know, the Beach Boys were a band from California that was really popular in the 1960s. Probably one of the top 3 big bands of the 60s, right up there with the Rolling Stones, and always in second and third place with the Beatles, because let's be honest, the Beatles were and are the greatest band in the world, and it's a fact. And if you don't like it, then I don't know how to put it to you. I wanted to see a decent documentary on the Beach Boys. Now there have been many documentaries of varying degrees, and because it was produced by Disney Plus, you would think, okay, the mouths with the big ears have put some money in, maybe we'll get a different and better version of the Beach Boys story told in a bigger view. Well, unfortunately, we didn't, in my opinion at least, but I'll get onto that in a minute. But I want to talk about the good stuff first before we get into the negative stuff, because let's be honest, the only reason you really watch these reviews is to get to the negatives, innit? But I'll talk about the good stuff. The good stuff is the footage, the use of archive and music is pretty good. The soundtrack is really great, hearing all the songs, and I would recommend just listening to the soundtrack. It's probably the best thing about the documentary. And that's really it. Okay, we're going to talk about what I have a problem with this documentary. Now, I was excited for this documentary because, it's something to watch. And, in a time where I personally find most media a bit, ugh. And when I heard they were doing a documentary on the Beach Boys, I thought, brilliant, I've got something to watch. And then I looked at that runtime and I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. Now, my problem is, it's alright for some bands, if it's like, I don't know, Love or The Seeds or any band that doesn't have a lot of discographies or whatever. But with the Beach Boys, that's going to be a problem when, you got to remember, the Beach Boys have had a long, detailed history and career, right? Now, whether you like the post-60s stuff or not, they are still an interesting band with a big history. I mean, again, they were one of the top 3 big acts of the 1960s. With a band like that, you would have thought with, because it's Disney Plus and it's on streaming, you thought that maybe they would have expanded it or do something in the vein of Beatles anthology, you know, where there is no limits. You can tell everything you can as long as it's entertaining. Unfortunately, they don't do that. It's a mixed bag. I mean, the story's a bit familiar. We've heard all the fucking history of the Beach Boys, like how they formed, you know, the dad being a walloper, the relationship being strained, and really the music not getting interesting till Pet Sounds, really, or when Brian Wilson retires from performing live and focusing more on the studio side to create some of the iconic tracks that the Beach Boys would be known for today. Yeah, I think the structure should have been longer, and I think, again, had they gone for that Beatles anthology structure, I think we would have got a better structure of the story. As well, we would have had some interesting stories. Now, unfortunately, it's the same old shit we have heard in 1,000 Beach Boy stories. Usually the structure is the beginning up until their revival in popularity in the mid-70s when American Graffiti reintroduced their music. Or was it the compilation album Endless Summer? I don't know. But, you know, that's usually a thing we just don't talk about afterwards, which is better for us. But I thought they would have done something interesting, like, you know, give us something new. Oh, actually, no, the only new thing I found interesting was how the Beach Boys actually formed. That's the only thing I've actually heard new, was how, you know, the Wilsons brothers' parents had gone off to a holiday, and because they spent all the food, they needed money to, you know, survive. And apparently, like, they performed in front of Al Jardine's mother to give them the money to the instrument. That I never heard. I don't know how I haven't, but that's a story I've never heard. I think that's probably the only new, interesting story that actually fascinated me. And one of the strangest ones was, and I never noticed this, in the documentary, they talk about when Brian Wilson announced his retirement to focus more on the studio, and how obviously they had to get the Wrecking Crew. Now, if you ask anyone, one of the biggest problems with the Beach Boys is the fact that they don't play their instruments. And it was strange in the documentary, they made it out like some of them actually contribute to the musical contribution of those recordings, which is not accurate. Apparently, I'm not the only one, because Carol Kay, the Wrecking Crew bass player, you know, someone who was actually with the Beach Boys and who performed on those recordings, said that apart from Brian, none of the members actually contributed much except the vocals. They weren't even there when they even recorded the musical tracking. So that's a bit weird. I don't know what that's all about. Which I think must have tell if the makers can't even fucking be honest and tell you what is going on. They have to make up this fancy idea that, you know, they were actually in the recording, which is not fucking true. I mean, later on, post Smile, they did a bit, and the early, maybe the first 3 albums, they were involved, but between, which is of course Endless Summers to Smile, they didn't really contribute much except vocals, which is a bit fucking strange. And another problem I had, the lack of the Wrecking Crew. I mean, if you're going to make a Beach Boys documentary, you've got to have the Wrecking Crew. I mean, they were the reason why the Beach Boys had a fucking career, in my opinion, right? They only had 2 contributors. There was, I can't remember the keyboarder's name, but I'll put it in there. He gets a lot of time, and then they use archive footage of the late Hal Blaine, the drummer. But Carol Kay doesn't get a lot of screen time. Again, it's archive views, which I thought was a bit strange, because she is a big factor. I mean, heck, she's the reason why, you know, Good Vibrations is such a tune. And I just thought it was strange. Like, there's no contributions from Tommy Tedesco, Glenn Campbell. I mean, fucking hell. Why would you not get Glenn Campbell? He was on some of those recordings, which is strange. And Glenn Campbell, the Rhinestone Cowboy, he's on Pet Sounds. So why would you not mention that? Very strange. It's just, the only two contributors they ever had was Hal Blaine and the keyboard player, which I thought was a bit odd. Why would you not, include the rest? And the story's about the same. And one thing I noticed was when they get to Pat Sound, do you know how long they talk about Pat Sound? Which is arguably, whether you agree or not, it's probably the Beach Boys' masterpiece. It's probably the album that you only know about the Beach Boys. Do you know how long they talk about that album for about? Probably about 2 minutes. Which is a bit strange considering it's the biggest magnum opus and they only talk about it for 2 minutes. They talk about Brian Wilson on the LSD, working with Tony Asher, and talk about some of the recordings and the battles, and then all of a sudden, right, okay, now we're on to when it was released. You're like, what? It's baffling because in 2008 there was a documentary about the making of this album, which was what was the series? Classic Albums. They did a far better job in 2008 about the making of this album than this documentary. And again, it's that bloody runtime. Because they have to try and cram everything into one, you're missing half the detail. And it's kind of like, why even bother? It's like, can you imagine trying to make a documentary on the Beatles in an hour? You can. I mean, you can try, but you can't. You can't just make a documentary you can't have the detail of making with the Beatles and then all of a sudden, imagine talking, I don't know, we're talking about with the Beatles, what it was like trying to record that follow-up album, and then all of a sudden we're just up to Rubber Soul. It's like, the fuck, how did we get from A to B? Really baffling. Smile gets about maybe a minute, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, that happened. Now we're just going to talk about the Beach Boys' post-Smile career. And yeah, they talk about that for a few minutes. Charles Manson. Now this was an interesting one. Now, if you didn't know anything about the Beach Boys, you probably know about Charles Manson, or at least his involvement with one of the Beach Boys member, which was Dennis Wilson. He gets maybe about a minute or no, and then it's just like, oh, that happens. Like, they don't even talk about the song that the Beach Boys use. I can't remember the Beach Boys title, but the Charles Manson one was called Cease to Exist. This will be the name. And they talk about that for a minute, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, now we're going to the Mansons killing Sharon Tate. It's like, the fuck? What? I thought I was going crazy. I thought, have I had too much to drink or something? Because honestly, it's just like 1 minute we're talking about one thing, and then we're just at the end of it. It's like, what is going on here? Yeah, who'd have thought it? Charles Manson, one of the most fucking notorious folks in human history, who's a complete psychopath, and they only talk about him for a minute. It's like making a documentary about Winston Churchill and just, having Adolf Hitler there for a second, and then just like, oh yeah, he was a baddie, now we're just going to move on. Now the part I was really interested in was the 70s period when they got Blondie Chapman and Ricky Fatia in the band. Guess how long they're on for? A minute. Why even have the effort to get Blondie Chapman in if you're only going to talk about it for like a second? It's like, why? They talk about maybe for a few seconds and then instantly it's just like, now we're just going to cut to when Endless Summer comes. You're like, what? Honestly, strange choices. And this is where my biggest issue with this documentary, because I thought the idea with streaming was that there was no limits. You can make any product however long you wanted to be, from 2 to 3 hours. Can you imagine if Stranger Things, one of the most popular television shows, had been put on a broadcast TV channel like ABC or something? It would not last the way it has lasted. You know, it probably would have ended up like Firefly or something, where behind the scenes problems messed up the scheduling and whatever, because they're trying to fit in a science fiction TV show with in between the news and the sports. And I just felt like this was really butchered. And I think had they took more time into structuring better, you could have got something new, but it just doesn't. And you hear the same old fucking stories. And I hate to imagine being a newcomer. If I was a newcomer today, I would be confused by it. I'd just be like, oh, right. You know. Oh, that's what it is? Oh, okay. The second problem is Mike Love. Mike, the ladies' man's love.
So I am very much a ladies' man. I admit to that. Yes, life in prison as ladies' man. Just imprison me with a few ladies. That's all I ask. No, it's true. I do like girls. I am the author of the words of California Girls.
Oh boy, this documentary spends a lot of time with Mike Love. I often wonder if he was involved and had a lot of say into it, because fucking hell, they spend more time with him than with Brian. I mean, a lot of Brian's interviews are archived because unfortunately he's getting on with age, obviously, from all the various health problems, and especially recently with the passing of his late wife. Obviously, I assume this documentary is filmed before she passed away, but, you know, watching Brian is kind of sad, because you think, God, he is not getting any better, is he? Unfortunately. So they spent a lot of time with Mike Love. I mean, obviously they spent a bit with Al Jardine and Bruce Johnston, but that's about it. They spent a lot of time. Oh no, I briefly also spent a bit with David Marks, the original guitar player. But unfortunately, Mike Love sure loves fucking talking, doesn't he? And how he's all caring and all that. If you're that caring, mate, why did you sue your bro in the 90s, huh? Yeah, don't geese it. There's a bad chance of me being the Pope than you being a fucking Beach Boy. The Talking Heads. Oh my God, dude. We have to talk about the Talking Heads. So one of my other biggest problems with this documentary is some of the choices of the Talking Heads, particularly the non-members. And what I mean is people who were born after the Beach Boys. I mean, the one interesting Talking Head was Lindsey Buckingham, which surprised me, actually. I didn't even know he even was a Beach Boys fan. I always assumed he was just a Beatles fan. But with him, I can take him because he was somebody who was actually there, and he can give what his thoughts on what it was like being a fan of the Beach Boys, what their music meant to them. But then when you get to something like a biographer or some questionable fans, you think, why on earth were they there? It's where you got to take a pinch of salt and think, they're bullshitting here. And one of the things is, why do we have a biographer? Why is this a thing in band documentaries? I never understood the point of them. Like, the only time I can accept a biographer if it's, I don't know, like a documentary on William Shakespeare or Jack the Ripper. Because obviously, you know, the folks who are at those events aren't fucking around anymore, and they didn't have video and audio proof to show what they actually thought. So I can understand that, but why do you need a biography on the Beach Boys when there was plenty of archive footage and audio? And heck, unlike, say, the Beatles, where it's only just Paul and Ringo, most of the Beach Boys are still alive. So why do you need that? And even some of the Wrecking Crew, or even if you're going to have, you know, more like, say, Dennis or Carl Wilson, or some of the Wrecking Crew who aren't around anymore, you still got archive footage. Why not just use that? But no, we need some biographer who's talking at his arse and, you know, pretending like he was actually there. Yeah, I don't buy it. I mean, the guy, I can't remember his name, but he looks about I don't know, what, 40 or 50? And you're just like, he wasn't there. Why is he even in this? You know, because what makes a good documentary, and again, I'm going to keep saying this, the reason why Beatles Anthology worked is because they got people who were actually still alive and who were actually with the Beatles, right? The Beach Boys have this one contributor, and I've got to look up his name, which really irritated me. So, what's his name again? I found it, right. Ryan Tedder. Oh my fucking lord, where the hell do you begin with this guy? So this guy, I don't know what he is. I think he's a music producer. And you can clearly tell he's talking at his arse. Why? I mean, look at this guy. Does this guy look like he was born in 1960s? No. He looks... I've had to look him up when he was born in. He was born in 1979. 10 years after the Manson slaughter. And there he is going on about when Brian takes his first nervous breakdown on a plane. And there he is going on like, it's very sad, you know, and it's very difficult. The structure and the pressure of execs trying to tell the artists to come up with something. And I went and going, you're talking full of fucking shit. Why is this guy even on this documentary? Like, can you imagine if, I don't know, Disney announced they were doing a documentary on the White Album, and then all of a sudden they get someone like me. It was very difficult making the Beatles' White Album because Paul McCartney felt the pressure of not being there, and with Brian Epstein unfortunately passing away, he felt there was a lot of pressure and the band weren't listening to him. Now, if I had seen that, I would have been going, get that guy off my fucking screen. He's talking a load of pish. And there's this guy pretending. It's ridiculous. He's acting like he was actually there. You're like, why are you on this? It's just silly, man. It's so silly. My opinion is, the only contributors I would allow in a documentary is, 1, the band members, 2, people who are associated at the time with the band members, like, I don't know, a producer or a family member, and maybe, depending on the mood of people, maybe fans or even journalists, you know, people who are actually there at the time documenting these events to tell the story. You know, why are you getting these, like, Generation X millennials fucking talk about the Beach Boys, like, acting like they were there in 1960 fucking free? Kitty fuck. And I'm a 26-year-old, right? I'm a 26-year-old who discovered the Beach Boys about, like, 2015. Like, you know, it's just, no. Why would you get someone, like, my age to talk about the Beach Boys like they were there? No. Like, I don't want it in a YouTube video because they're not fucking paid and you can take a pinch of salt going, this guy's talking shit. But because this is a Disney Plus, this is a paid for documentary made by a company with a, you know, few cash, that's what I have the problem. It's like, why are you getting these lunatics pretending like they know what the fuck they're talking about? It reminded me of that Genesis documentary from 2014, Together and Apart, that was later released on home video as Some of the Parts, which is an accurate title if I'm being honest. When they brought in a bunch of celebs and radio DJs who weren't even there, or people who weren't even old enough to remember when Phil Collins was back. It's like, why are you in this? Why not just make the documentary on the fucking people who are actually there? You know? I mean, because the final shot is this beautiful... Spoilers in case, you know, I'll get out of the way. Spoilers, you haven't seen it, go watch it, but if you don't care, I'm going to spoil it. There's this end part where there's this footage of all the current members of the Beach Boys still alive on the beach, chatting, having a good time. And I'm going, why aren't we seeing that? Why aren't we hearing more of it? Why couldn't they have done a documentary within a room with them just talking? I would have been interested in that. Who needs some fucking biographer who is probably wasn't even born enough to even remember what the fucking Beach Boys were, apart from I Get Around or whatever? Like, you know, the wasted opportunity. As a 26-year-old who wanted to learn more about the Beach Boys, I don't think this is very informative. And I think if newer viewers were watching this, I don't think they'd be impressed. And then I had to look up the director, Frank Marshall, and look at all the stuff he did. He directed Congo. Congo. Oh, God. That adaptation of that Michael Crichton book, which, you know, he's the guy who did Jurassic Park, and oh God, I can't even describe that film. If you haven't seen Congo, it's an interesting film. And then of course I've seen other docs. He directed the Bee Gees documentary, How to Mend a Broken Heart. I went, now it makes sense. Now that film was fine, but again, same problem, because it's on a certain runtime. There wasn't a lot to mention. Again, the Bee Gees, that's another band with a long career. Again, they're a band, you cannot make a documentary in an hour. Like, if you got bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Beach Boys, or the Bee Gees, with a long 5-decade span career, like, the only way to do it, it's got to be like episodic or multiple films or episodes. You know, you can't tell it in one. And I think this documentary is a good example on how not to make a documentary on a high profile band with a long decade of work. Honestly, I would always recommend watching it on how not to become a documentary filmmaker. And, you know, it's kind of a shame that it is what it is. But, you know, it's just where we live in. No one gives a fuck anymore about actually doing research. They just care about just getting it out, making a few views, and that's it. Each to their own, I guess. If I was to give it a rating, oh gosh, I don't even like giving a rating. I guess about 3 out of 5, maybe 3 out of 10. I don't know, it's just a mixed bag of a documentary, and I think, you know, if someone was to do another attempt at a documentary on the Beach Boys, please, just go the Beatles anthology route and just do an episodic order. Far more interesting, and you get more time to expand on the topics that needs the space. Not in an hour where you have to quickly fit everything into one. And I don't know if it's just because of the current year where I feel like everything is edited like a TikTok video or those videos on Facebook where they have to speed it up and give the characters chipmunk voices so they can avoid copyright. It's just not on. I've been Blair Harrison and you've been watching my, I don't know what you call this, ramblings of a review. I don't know if this will make sense to anyone. What does the proper YouTube say? What's your opinion on this documentary? Please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And just to prove that I'm wrong, and maybe this documentary worked for you, especially if you're a younger viewer. I'd love to hear your thoughts to see what you thought of this. I'll see you all next time for another video, wherever be. Take care. A